That's pay-per-view.
Hey, Artie.
How's it going?
And look who we have here. We got KilRoyWasHere, Robert Carroll himself.
That's real good. So, how's everybody doing tonight? Let me put the thing on so I can see how everybody's doing tonight. I just broke something. I'm breaking.
You thought I was frozen? I am not frozen.
So I actually did a weird. I hit a macro key on the keyboard that I think actually might have hiccuped me.
Artie,
so anyway,
that story that you said about you putting that, I'm still laughing in bed by myself. I don't know why, but I see you playing that monster game and putting those stack of photocopy papers down, and they're just sliding and killing all the stacks. I know that happened. You kill me. Hey, Gilbert, what's up, man? Hey, Steven, today we're talking about CDGs, and you know what? I was talking to Robert down there, KilRoyWasHere. I was talking to him about the show tonight, CDGs, and he says, oh, CDGs, and I thought, great, he knows something about it. Let's bring him on. Have I played a CDG? No, but I have many CDGs. Yeah, I've played it like you said. Yeah.
With the man himself.
Yeah, that was memorable in a different way. Yes. And other than that, I don't know. Actually, didn't Mark Herman invent that, the CDG?
So that's a good question. I mean, I would say in the conventional CDG sense, yeah, I think so. So the first one is for the people. Is it for the people or was it by the people?
We the people.
We the people. Was it that?
Was it We the People?
Yeah.
Okay,
sure.
so that has a specific mechanism in it. It's not just that there are cards, okay? So the mechanism is that you have a set of points that each card has a point value, and then you spend the points when you play the card. That, I think, is the innovation that Mark brought to it. And then there's, in For the People, there's a specific evolution of that mechanism, which is that you play the card either for the points, the ops points, or for the event. Or, you know, and different games handle it differently. So like Twilight Struggle, for example, works exactly that way, but there are events tied to either side. And if you are playing the other side's event, then you play both. You play both the event and the points. So not all of them do that, but that's the framework that Mark laid down in those couple of games. And many, but not maybe all, CDGs since then have followed that general mechanism.
Who did he grab that from?
I'm guessing he pulled it out of his genius brain. I mean, I don't know. I mean, certainly war games had cards before that. I have, because this is my life, I happen to have one sitting right here. But this isn't really this isn't exactly the same kind of thing, but there is like an operations deck that every turn you pull a card from, and that determines what the Imperial player can do. So certainly, and don't forget, Mark, of course, was no stranger to SPI. So
right,
I would love to ask Mark that question about what his influences were on that idea, but I don't think these ideas ever really just mysteriously materialize.
No.
I think they come on, we stand on the shoulders of Jim Dunnigan for, and company. In this case, John Butterfield, but
I was going to say,
maybe that is about Freedom of the Galaxy is a Butterfield design.
Right. It's Butterfield and Dunnigan, isn't it?
It's Butterfield and somebody. Hold on. I'll tell you, because I got it right here. Howie Barish, actually.
Oh,
so.
And Rob, CDGs. What was your first CDG?
Mine was probably Paths of Glory. Was one of my first ones, and then I kind of started backtracking from that. I mean, We the People was, I believe, like 1991. And I never played that one, but I did play, you know, its follow-up. What's the follow-up to it where he redesigned it into the revolutionary?
Washington's War.
Yeah, Washington's War.
And it works the same way, same system.
It's a little bit different, I think. Washington's War, I think it's a little bit more refined and than We the People. Again, I never played We the People, so
I never played We the People.
I've never played it either, actually.
Is it today your birthday, ARDWULF?
It is today.
Happy birthday, ARDWULF.
Thanks so much.
What do you want for your birthday?
What do I want? I bought some games. I mean, instead of scotch, I was getting to this just before. Instead of scotch, I bought games. So I bought two things at the local game store, and then I ordered some stuff that's been trickling in over the last couple of weeks. So
if you were going to buy a bottle of scotch, how expensive would you have gone
for this? I might have gone for the Lagavulin for this, actually, which is here. It's about $94 a bottle or something like that. And it's about as much. It's about as high as I'll go, to be honest.
Okay, so you're a peaty guy then, eh?
Oh, very much so. Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, so you bought yourself $90 worth of games.
Oh, I didn't say that. Do I have the thing that just came today? It's not a war game, though.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, I don't even know where it went. Actually, I got the. This is the soft cover, and I the hard cover came today. So, but it's all RPG stuff in this case. So,
well, going back to CDGs, maybe it was a state I was in. I had a few drinks. But I had a hard time playing the card and the game for some reason. I couldn't.
Well, so, I mean, the mechanism I just described is not the mechanism that coin games use. So I would also describe coin games as card-driven games, but definitely they're not sharing that classic Mark Herman CDG mechanic.
Okay.
And of the coin games, I mean, I think it's generally allowed that Fire in the Lake is one of the harder ones to play. So, and it's one of the ones I haven't played, actually. I have it. I just haven't never actually played it. So, and one of these days I will get to doing it.
Well, actually, I believe like the coin series, the Volco's, the precursor to the coin series was Labyrinth, and that is closer to the CDG that we're kind of talking about and used to, with the action points or operation points in the events. Mm-hmm. And that follows along more into that. I mean, to me, the whole thing, I mean, Paths of Glory is kind of considered one of the poster childs, I guess, for CDGs and one of the more, I guess, beloved of those titles. And, CDGs themselves, have limitations. And I think a lot of people kind of have some issues with them because of they don't necessarily recreate the history the same way. I mean, there's history on the cards and the events, and that's kind of that kind of gives you the feel of history in that you're seeing the cards and you're reading the events and and even though they're played out of time, you're getting some of the feel of what happened during that period. But the way that you can play those and the way that you use the operation points, you can come up with total ahistorical effects. And so you're not really doing a sim of that period. And I think that's one of what some people don't like about, CDGs. You're not doing a hex encounter. You're not, they're more often than not, if not necessarily exclusively, but more often than not, they're point-to-point games.
Yeah, but hold on a second, Rob. But then doing a regular sim, hex encounter sim, it's going to be ahistorical as soon as you start.
Well, every game is, is that way, right? But I guess the whole that goes back to the old debate of playability versus simulation, right? And that if and some of the earlier games, in the maybe 60s and 70s, even in the 80s, really were focusing more on simulation and trying to get the order of battle right and trying to make sure that you had the units in the right spot and that, you had some decisions, but more often than not, you're going to have the purpose of it was to give you the same decisions that those commanders had at that time. So, you were going to try to have somewhat of a historical treatment to it. Over time, and CDGs, I think, mainly go to this, is there's more of a focus on playability. There's more of a focus on a game. And that, yeah, you've got all the trappings of the history, you've got all the trappings of a simulation, whatever that means, but you're really focusing more on the playability, that I want to have some decisions and I want to, and again, CDGs focus on victory points a lot of times. So
well, you're talking right now, you're talking about coin games, right?
No, CDGs as well. We the People, Washington's War, Paths of Glory.
So if I didn't misunderstand, which I probably did, you're saying CDG is a gamification type thing in a game. It's to gamify a sim game.
Well, I'll let Robert answer that. Actually,
well, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, in some respects, I think so. I mean, it's a different mechanism to approach a historical period or to approach an engagement. I mean, a lot of times the CGGs are really focusing on operational level or higher type engagements. I don't know off the top of my head if there's any that really focus on the tactical.
I don't know.
Combat Commander. I would describe Combat Commander as a card-driven game.
Okay.
Yeah,
or even Commands and Colors. I could think of almost no card game, like war games using cards, which are as dependent on the card flow and the specific cards that draw as Combat Commander. I can think of none.
I look at those two. I look at Command and Colors and Combat Commander, though, are card driven, but those are mainly a different mechanism of how to simulate orders and commands. Yes. And so you're taking cards to simulate or a different mechanism of how to portray commands or giving orders in the field, and not so much of like the traditional CDGs, which is the word I guess you used, Dan, a gamification, a way of trying to keep how you move the game forward, how you move the narrative forward, either by making decisions with op points.
Well, I know that's the mechanic, but I was wondering if Mark Herman actually brought that to life to make it more accessible, make the war game more accessible. Is it more accessible if it's a CDG?
Not necessarily. No, I don't think so. I mean, so like we can go right back to Mark for the perfect example or counter example, which is Empire of the Sun, which is a card-driven game. It's a Mark Herman card-driven game, and it works using basically that exact mechanism. That's the classic Mark Herman CDG mechanism, and yet many players find Empire of the Sun really, really challenging to learn. So if it is, I think, not that accessible. Now, I think there's other examples where you could say, well, yeah, this is a fairly accessible game, but I think that's an independent variable of whether it's a CDG or not, and whether it's accessible or not. Mm-hmm. Washington's War / for the whatever it was originally, We the People. That's a very simple. I think that's a very simple game. That's very easy to play and very approachable. But like Paths of Glory is kind of complicated, and For the People is kind of complicated, and Empire of the Sun is kind of complicated. So I mean, I think it's an independent factor.
But what's the complexity about it? Is it again going with the details of the rules, the minutia, and all that?
In the case of Paths of Glory, yeah, I'd say so. I mean, and For the People as well. In the case of Empire of the Sun, not so much, because I don't think Empire of the Sun's all that complicated. But to play it at all competently, you have to have kind of internalized how it works. Brant, here's your answer. No.
No, but what's Brent saying here? That's funny.
He's saying there's a big thing about whether such and such a game, Combat Commander or not, is a CDG over on Console World. And no, I just don't. I'm not that. There's no profit in any of us going and experiencing that drama over there. No, thank you. So thanks everyone. So for the birthday wishes, I do appreciate it, even though I'm probably less cranky than I should be today. So,
well, here you go, man.
65. You know, here's the I'm going to be in the same room as Brant at some point in the not all that distant future. I can punch him in the throat. So,
but it's funny though, because how would you? And I don't know why it intrigues me how you can argue that Combat Commander is not a card-driven game.
It's one of those things where it's if the established community, the established community vibe around a specific game has landed in this position that it's not, then they will defend that to the death for whatever dumb reason, I suppose. I mean, I would say it's definitely not the same mechanism like the classic Mark Herman CDG mechanic, but it's 100% every pacing element that occurs in a game of Combat Commander happens because you drew this card and then this card and then this card. So I can think of no game that more literally says this is a card-driven game than Combat Commander. And that's what I don't like about it.
Rob, what do you think, man?
Well, I mean, again, it's all how you define stuff. So if you want to define, I want to know your opinion. But if you want to define card-driven games narrowly and say that it has to be op points and events and point-to-point generally, then everything outside of that is not a card-driven game. But I think that if you want to define card-driven game by the words themselves, card-driven game, then obviously, you know, all card war games, you know, and there's been some notes up here like Fields of Fire and up front, all card war games are going to be card-driven games because the cards drive the game. They drive the narrative. They move it forward. So you can get caught up in all kinds of semantics on how you want to define stuff.
And it's funny, Robert is a voracious reader of the law. So he'll never give you yes or no answer. Never. It's not in his nature. It's not gonna happen.
We're not arguing like, you know, chemistry here, where will this happen or will this won't. I mean, we are engaged in a semantic discussion here, right?
Yeah.
But I would call Warfighter and probably Upfront, which I've never played, by the way, probably Upfront as card games rather than card-driven games. Fields of Fire, I think, is actually a board game, but you use the cards to build the board, and Upfront kind of works like that. But
yeah, but it's more than that. Cards are good for simulating random events, but it's more than that.
That's true. So one of the things that Robert mentioned was the sort of ahistorical order of events that one can see in many card-driven games. It's not all of them. Like Paths of Glory, that is a frequent criticism of CDGs, in that you could see that these events didn't happen in this historical order, and therefore you're getting a sort of garbled version of history. But I rather look at that than through the Mark Herman lens of Empire of the Sun, where it doesn't represent that literal operation. Instead, it represents something along the same scope as that operation. And there are CDGs that have taken steps to try to mitigate that problem, like Paths of Glory, with its 3 decks that represent the 3 different levels of escalation of the Great War. For the People, I'm going to constantly get that mangled between For the People and We the People. And Empire of the Sun, they don't do that. They just have one big deck.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say there's another, the Stage of Siege, the original Victory Point games.
I love
system. Now they had a way where you could play with them in order because they're all numbered, and so that you could go in chronological order, put all the cards in order, and play it out that way. I mean, I think that might get a little old after a while.
Yes, after once. Actually.
Come on.
Yeah, but if you got short-term memory, then hey, it's great.
Well, that's actually interesting. Actually, that's a really neat idea because the cards are going to be numbered anyway, right?
Yeah.
So why not number the cards in chronological order? And that's actually neat. So you could play it that way if you wanted to. And I think most people probably would only do it once, but you know. So they're also solitaire games, so that we're clear. Legion of Honor, I would describe as a role-playing game, but a super old-school role-playing game like On Guard from GDW, rather than like a D&D necessarily.
Okay, hold on a second. What did you just say? On Guard, GDW, what is that?
GDW did a Musketeers-type RPG in the very early days, in like the late 70s, called On Guard. I think you can actually still get it in some kind of print-on-demand version. And
this is, you can play it solo?
I believe you can, yeah. But it was another one of those sort of very procedural things. It actually Legion of Honor actually reminds me, although Legion of Honor is Napoleonic.
Right.
I've been trying to get that game, man. I swear to God.
It's a good one.
Legion of Honor?
Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to play it. It looks neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does use cards a lot to move, you know, to kind of do your random events, right? Mm-hmm. And what happens in certain things. But there's a lot of charting and keeping track of what you're doing on a like a character sheet. So I had a segment I did a while back about role-playing war games, and that was my number one that I kind of focused on or called out as far as being a role-playing war game.
Wait, is Brian trying to stir up Hornets?
He totally is.
What's the matter with this guy? But I'm interested. What's he saying?
I demand an actual citation from David Doctor on that for one. So David Doctor is the designer of Triumph of Chaos, okay, which is from Clash of Arms, at least the current edition's from Clash of Arms. And it is a game about the Russian Civil War that explicitly uses the Paths of Glory CDG system. And it's very much along the same lines of exactly what we're talking about, except with, more errata. But you could make that claim. I'd have to hear I'd really have to, in all seriousness, I'd have to hear the argument. I would say that, we mean a couple of different things when we say CDG, like Robert pointed out. We're engaged in a semantic argument about, do we take the term card-driven game literally? Because there isn't just like the term war game, there isn't an official definition about it. So we have sat here arguing and bitching about it for well over 20 years now. And so there's a snobbery against that too. I would not just based on what Brant has said here, and like I said, I haven't seen any David Doctor talking about this. I would not want to interpret what Brant is saying, that the argument that he's reporting. I wouldn't say that that's necessarily a snobbish argument. That's just a category argument that doesn't contain a value statement of any kind. Lots of people have problems with the Legion of Honor rulebook.
Really?
Yeah, we had a local. It's a tough rulebook, but it's pretty procedural game. So I don't imagine it's going to be that big of a problem. We actually at one point had a local group that was getting together at one of the local game stores, pre-pandemic, of course, that got together once a month or once a quarter or something like that to play Legion of Honor, just like you'd play D&D.
Well, I've been trying to get it. I think Noble Knights got it, and I think it's like $70, $80, man. That's
approximately retail for it. If that's what they want for it, I'd grab it.
Really?
It's a really nice components. The physical component quality is really high, as it typically is nowadays from Clash of Arms.
And Rod,
it's got French words all over the place. You'll love it.
Oh, that's right. Bye. What can I say? Curious on folks' thoughts on CDGs versus chit pull. Not in a better or worse way. They both rock. And Sister Mechanic, but I think both of them are awesome. I don't think anything is wrong. And is there a CDG chit pull hex encounter war game?
Actually, no. Well, kind of actually. So the new I don't have it here. It's up in the filming area, so I can't do again what I did last week with The Most Fearful Sacrifice, which is the new Herman Lettman game. It's interesting because it's a card game. I don't know that it's card. I would call it card driven actually, but the original underlying system, the blind sword system, is a chit pull system. Okay, A Most Fearful Sacrifice evolves that into using cards instead, and I actually think it'll feel a lot better with cards than it did with chits, because you kind of end up with, the way it played out, you ended up with like a hand of chits, and a hand of chits is just like not cool. A hand of cards is much cooler, right? So yeah, kind of. But cards, you know, cards have more room on them. So yeah, most chit pull games are all they're really telling you is whose turn. Most of the time, they're really just telling you whose turn it is now. Yeah. So when I think of chit pull games, I think of GTS, the Grand Tactical Series from MMP, where you draw a chit, and there's a couple of like utility chits that do game functions like make smoke go away and stuff like that. But it's a chit that's tied to a formation. So you draw that, you know, the 101st Airborne's chit, so the 101st Airborne goes. Or the Dark Valley, where you have either Russian or German chits in the pool, and then that pool kind of evolves over the course of the game. But still, it's only like, you know, either German chits, and then these German units can go, or you pull a Russian chit, and then Russian units can go, but then they have to follow certain rules based on whichever type of chit that it is. Card-driven games tend, like the classic model card-driven games anyway, tend to have a more sophisticated interaction with the mechanism than that. So in again, to use Paths of Glory as an example, you can play cards for the ops. You can play cards so you draw a specific card, right? You have a hand, first of all, and it's not just this one card. But that's not always true, right? So like in coin games, for example, you draw a card, and that's the card that's in play right now.
Oh, you don't keep a card?
In Paths of Glory, in coin, there's no hand. There's the card that's in play and the card that's on deck, and that's it. In Paths of Glory, though, you have a hand. So you play a specific card, but you can play it for ops. You can play it for the event. You could also play it for replacements. You could play it for strategic movement. So there's like a lot of different things you can do with any particular card in a lot of those card-driven games. Another example that I've played a couple of times is the Napoleonic Wars, which is another one that follows that exact same ops or event type model.
Well, and another game that kind of gets out of that, but that Paths of Glory and Napoleonic Wars and We the People is the No Retreat series. The No Retreat.
That's true.
I was going to mention.
Yeah, those cards, you know, do multiple things as well. And if you discard a certain number, you get reinforcements or replacements. And then they also, you have to use, you know, the little counters, little round counters to pay for, you know, some of the cards as well. So there's multiple use on that. And I would kind of put the No Retreat series in that card-driven vein as well.
Now, are CDGs, would they be considered more of an intellectual type of gaming?
I don't think so. I mean, there definitely is a different tone, and lots going to depend on the game. But again, looking at the classics like your Paths of Glory and your Napoleonic Wars and your For the People and stuff like that, I'm more intellectual. I don't know, but more narrative is possible because you have the narrative of the events on the cards that are occurring as you play the game.
I look at it as it's another mechanic, and it's kind of an abstraction mechanic, but it's just another way to deal with the circumstance and move the game forward. You know, instead of doing the I go, you go, or pulling shits, you know, to orders. This is a different way of giving you a decision space. You know, you've got these op points, so you can make decisions that way. You know, with what cards.
When you say it's abstract, I understand. But in regards to a war game, wouldn't you just think of that as like that's your orders, and maybe you have a choice of orders to use, whatever, bang, no, yes, maybe.
Yeah, something like Combat Commander explicitly does. That's explicitly how it models orders.
Yeah, like if you don't have the move card, game going nowhere.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, that's what I hate about it, actually.
Well, and it's interesting too on the same what you were talking about on the going from chits to cards, like in the new Most Fearful Sacrifice. You know, World at War did that. I mean, the old World at War series by Lock and Load, you know, had chits. You know, and then the new World at War '85, they went to cards, and also the Nations at War went to cards, but it's really just a representation of chits.
Yeah, and it's really one or the either or. Is there functionally the same mechanism, but cards are bigger and you could put more on cards. Mm-hmm. I think the only real difference. Certainly, you could have cards. So grabbing another random SPI example, the old game Star Force. You would have these randomizer chits to determine like the combat factors, and you could easily just put those on cards, right? It would be they'd be easier to handle, I think, for most people, and they would wear better because cards wear, frankly, better than chits, even if you don't put them on.
Yeah, you can't sleeve a chit.
Well, you can. You can use those coin cases. I've seen people do that with.
You just started something. Are you
with
crazy?
The GTS? Yeah. Well, I've seen it all, man. So those coin cases that you would put like collector's coins in, you can get those and put your chits in those, and they will prevent your chits from getting worn. The GTS chits I've seen of people's play copies are wrecked. So,
yeah, but I mean, but that coin where you put your chit, it's square, it's bigger.
No, you get round ones. I've seen round ones. And even so, you just put it in like a big pillowcase or something like that. Like you've seen the Euros where you're pulling chits or whatever it is out of a bag. Yeah. The same thing. That's how we did it.
Okay. For some reason, I was thinking chits on the map or something. You know, you got like 1,000 chits of all these coin. Forget it. I pulled an ADD.
Yeah. So I mean, there's probably examples where that wouldn't work if there's like 100 chits in the pool, but in GTS, it tends to be like 12 or less. So it's pretty workable to do it that way.
And obviously, Warfighter is a card-driven game.
I wouldn't call it a card-driven game. I'd call it a card game.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I've never played Warfighter, so I'm talking out of my nether parts here. So bear that in mind. Carl mentions Axis Empires, which is a very interesting example because this is the current version of Totaler Krieg and Dicenso, and there's an upcoming revision of it as well. It's an interesting example because it has cards. It has a lot of cards, actually. There's like hundreds of cards in that thing. But the cards represent kind of like the strategic options. And you don't have a hand exactly. You have whatever is in the deck. And then some of those cards will have prerequisites you have to play first. So you'll have to like chain the cards together as you're able to play those strategic decisions that give you reinforcements or declare war on some random country or whatever.
You know, you just made me realize something now. Because my mind is all over the place and we were discussing difficulties and all that. Now, a difficult war game, there's no such thing. It's just the minutia of amount of information. It's like B-17, Queen of the Skies. You need all those charts to play the game. Well, a heavy, huge war game, it's not hard, basically. You just refer to the rules. No. Yes.
I don't consider... So B-17 is what I would call one of those procedural games where basically there is a procedure that that kind of is the game engine, and that you execute that procedure each turn. So don't you follow that procedure sequence of play in any game, period, and that's that? You know, yeah, but like B-17 is one of the criticisms that people make on B-17 and games like it is that there aren't many or any player decisions involved. So yeah, or even in like some of the enemy coast ahead games, right? So there's some decision making, but a lot of the decision making happens in like the campaign phase, where you're actually flying the missions and there's less decisions to make on the fly, right? Right. So every game has like a procedure that you follow to execute the game.
Right.
Some of those games are like, okay, now's the movement phase. Move whatever you want, right? Or now's the combat phase. Do whatever combats you want.
Okay. But you have a lot of decisions based on the number of counters you have and where you want to move and how does the terrain affect that. So
okay, no, but
they're a lot different than that.
I think that feels very different than like a B-17, where you're executing this process, which may be a complicated process, but I guarantee that there's a list in the game that says, here's the process in the order that you do it in.
That's right.
And like it B-17 or Target for Today, Target for Tonight, which is kind of like the modern version of those B-17 games. So that to me feels very different. And that's what I mean when I say it's super procedural.
Yeah, I tend to call those charty war games, and you're mainly I mean, there's some decisions in there, and then they're also very akin to role playing, because the more that you put yourself in that role or that feeling of what's going on, I think you're going to get more out of those games, because again, there's not the same layer or level or number of decisions. You're mainly just kind of going through a resolution. It's just you're resolving something and you're going to this chart, this chart, this chart, and then you resolve it again. And again, it's not without decisions. There's just not the same level or layer that you have with, a hex and counter game.
Now, Rob, the way I feel about a hex and counter game, okay, is it just looks more complex than a CDG, because you seem to have the cards for some reason helping you in the CDG. Now, going back to complexity of my previous thing, if you know movement, if you know like the mechanics of movement, the mechanics of line of sight, hills, then basically, what else could be more complex in a game when you're reading the sequence of play and you just go about the sequence of play? Sequence of play 1, A, B, C, D, you just follow that. So what's complex about that?
Well, I mean, so I'm going to now talk about OCS, right? Because we have like occasions almost every week. We play OCS twice a week, as everyone should be aware by now. And we have occasions at least once a week where we have to look some rule up because it's some weird interaction of the way the movement rules function and the terrain or the specific situation on the ground with enemies, Zocs, or whatever. OCS is possibly a terrible example here because it's super fiddly, right? And you have these weird things that happen in OCS, like truck movement type units interact very differently with zones of control than everybody else does, like leg movement units or tracked movement units. So, and the fact that you have a distinction between leg, truck, and tracked movement points, right, is itself fiddly. So, and then you have move mode units, right? Certain things don't happen, like you don't have a Zoc if you're in move mode, for instance. So it might look straightforward, and in some cases it probably is, but in other cases you can really get into thorny questions when you're trying to apply those straightforward-looking movement rules, for example, to say nothing combat or whatever, to the specific situation that you have at the moment. And that's the kind of thing that you hope playtesting catches, so that the rules can be specific about what you're supposed to do. But sometimes it doesn't happen.
CDGs limit the number of decision points at a moment in time, so can help a game flow. Yeah, see that, yes, and that would help me in the complexity of the game, something like that. But I remember speaking to Carl Paradzi of No Retreat, and he said his game would be complex for a guy like me.
I'll be honest, I think those games are reasonably complex. Those No Retreat games. I do not think those are incredibly simple games.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, I mean, what's the complexity about, and why does he have to up the complexity?
Carl's got a lot of stuff going on. And I mean, so the one I've looked at the most closely is the Russian front one, which I've bounced off. I still have it, but I've bounced off of it a couple of times now. There's a lot going on there. I mean, you got cards, and you're spending cards to do various things, and then other cards you'll like use the points off the cards or the events off the cards, or you'll spend cards to do to bring reinforcements back in. There's a lot going on in that. So just because it's a CDG doesn't mean it's easy. I mean, we already talked about Empire of the Sun, which is famously opaque to a lot of people.
Now, I mean, Carl hates fiddly games. Would you consider that game fiddly at all? The No Retreat series. Is there any fiddliness in that game?
I am going to say, first of all, I would be curious to see if Carl describes his game as a CDG. To completely dodge the question, because it feels fiddly to me, but that is possibly because I haven't really fully understood it. And it is possible that it is in fact not fiddly and is very elegant, and I just have not seen that yet. That's plausible to me, and there are certainly cases where that kind of thing has occurred.
Rob, you played that? I have never played it.
Yeah, no, I played it. I mean, it's kind of tough because, you know, once you put it all together, once you kind of understand it and know how it all flows and fits together, it doesn't seem as fiddly. It feels, it kind of, there's kind of a flow to it, and it's all interconnected. You know how the drawing the counters and playing the cards and then using the cards for multiple use, it all kind of flows. Getting to that feels awful fiddly. I mean, going through the rules and figuring out how that works, and it does feel kind of fiddly getting to that point. But once you understand it, I mean, you see how it all fits together. The same way for me was Empire of the Sun. That took, the rules themselves are not super complex compared to, like, let's say Advanced Squad Leader, but I don't
think they're as complex as For the People.
I might agree with that. There's some similarities there. Imagine how that happened, right? Mm-hmm. But getting to really once you understand how to play it, playing it is a whole different ball game, because there's a lot of decision points there, and playing it well is even another level because of when to use these cards and how to use these cards and how to make decisions. I mean, that's a game that is very, very, if you're have a tendency for AP, you can just get grind to a halt in that game.
Really?
Yeah, I'd agree with that statement too. I think that's possible to do, and I find that relatively easy to hit in For the People as well, to be honest.
So you would say that's more of a card-assisted game than a card-driven game, Carl's games?
I don't know. They come pretty close, because the cards are a key element to moving that game forward. So again, it's all depends on how you want to define it. If you take the broad definition, it clearly is a card-driven game. If you take a very narrow one, I don't know. I still think it might fit.
Now, I
agree with that.
Do you have options with cards with Carl's cards as opposed to a combat commander type option in your cards?
Yeah, well, yeah, the cards do have multiple use. Like, you can discard your card, not even use anything on it. Discard it for an effect. It gives you can't remember if they're called reinforcements or
okay.
So there's multiple use for the cards.
Okay, so therefore there's a complexity. You got to remember all this, because this is not written on the card itself.
No.
Peter Rushton mentioned up thread that he thinks that the cards reduce the number of decision points. And I don't know that that's necessarily true. I do think that in many cases, those same games that we're talking about have fewer units, or they have either area or point-to-point maps, and that tends to limit your decision points, because you have fewer pieces to play with in an environment with fewer nodes that you can positions that they can occupy. So that certainly does. And look at Empire of the Sun, right? It's a game that covers the whole Pacific War, but it's like a counter sheet and a half. It's a quite compact game.
Yeah,
I would say, man, seriously, you know, I mean, that's low counter density. And you know what? Carl is just adamant about like low counter density.
Carl's got super strong opinions about this topic, as we should all doubtless be aware. And Carl, I do not exist in complete alignment with Carl's strongly worded opinions. Let me put it that way.
Nobody does. Nobody. No, he's an engineer. You can argue with a guy like that? It's worse than arguing with Rob. At least Rob, you got a chance.
Engineers are always sure they're right and they're the smartest people in the room.
You know what? My wife is not an engineer, though she's a science person, whatever. And she says, Dan, shut up, don't argue with him.
But one of the things that engineers do is they you know, it depends what kind of engineer you are. One of the things that engineering is about is making things more efficient.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And in terms of, so I do see what I kind of completely disagree with a lot of Carl's landing points in this kind of discussion, because I've read the threads too. But I see where Carl's coming from, right?
Look, I mean, yes, I'll tell you something. Like the Mark Hermans, the Volkos, these are some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, because they can simplify. They can simplify an idea, and a dummy like me, they can make me understand. And it's like, whoa, and that's genius. Carl doesn't suffer fools.
Carl doesn't suffer people with different opinions than you.
No. The guy's a super nice guy, but I'm telling you,
I have no doubt.
The level of intelligence, and I can understand that, because when you get to a certain level, like in my music, when I get to a certain level, why do I want a short, fat little Italian coming up to you and saying, what's root? What's route? How do you spell it? What does it mean? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, as we talked about before, we talked about this when we had David on, David Thompson. It's hard to simplify, right? All war games and all games, but all war games, because that's what we're talking about, have abstractions in them, right? Even the most fiddly, simmy games you can think of, like I guess the simmiest game I can think of is probably Campaign for North Africa. There's abstractions in that, right? There's decisions that Richard Berg made that said we can't do. You know, I've often described it as the game where you keep track of individual jerry cans of gas, but you don't. You keep track of like fuel and water, right? But it's not the individual cans. That is an abstraction.
Did you just say that there are some games it's individual cans?
Not that I am aware of no game that is more fiddly like in this respect than Campaign for North Africa. Okay. You have like points, as far as I understand it. You have like fuel points and water points, and you have to keep track of those. But it's not individual jerry cans, right? Or individual drums. It's like metric ton, tens of metric tons or something like that. But that's an abstraction, right? So a difficult thing to do as a game designer is to decide, here are the things I want to model in my game, and here are the things that I can abstract away or abstract into a very simplified mechanism to depict those things, because that is the level of detail that I am going for in my model of what's happening in this game, right?
So Artie, then a coin game I just lost my train of thought. So a coin game is super factual, and it's just the event of cards that make it abstracted. Because other than that, it's not abstract. It's factual events that happen. You have it in the cards.
Well, yes. The events are abstract, but they're interacting with or implementing their events through the mechanics, which are abstracted.
Right.
Coin games are by nature, I mean, they're all abstract, right? But I think coin games are more abstract than a lot of other war games, in that you have like your distant plane, you have these coalition forces, right? That are just blocks, right? They're just these little blocks that you move around and push back and forth on the map, and eventually you want to withdraw as many of them as you can. But that's a huge abstraction. They're not battalion. I mean, a conventional war game might make might have counters, and they might represent battalions or regiments or even companies or whatever. Like a great example actually is Vietnam 1965 to 75, the classic victory games, where you do have actual counters with battalions and regiments and divisions and stuff like that on them. And then Fire in the Lake, where you have blocks. You have, you know, U.S. and Allied forces have some blocks, like 30 blocks or whatever it is, that you can move around the map to do various actions. But there's also, and I mean, we could get a lot of discussion just out of this. There's also really interesting parallels between Vietnam 1965 to 75 and the kinds of things you do in the span of a turn, by which I mean running the various operations, and then those specific menu of operations that you do in Fire in the Lake with those coalition forces or Viet Cong forces or whatever you have. There's a really interesting discussion that we could have there that we probably can't get in the next 10 minutes. Well, I mean,
if you want to carry this on at your house next week, I'm more than happy to get into that topic. I swear to God.
I don't want to talk about. We could talk about that offline. Let me put about next week's topic. Because
I see.
I'm reluctant to delve into that specific topic without people who know both games more than I, because I've played a little bit of Vietnam 1965 to 75, and I have not played Fire in the Lake, although I have played other coin games and have a general idea of how it works. The point here is there's an abstraction level that's like, there's more abstraction in Fire in the Lake than there is in something like the Victory Games Vietnam.
Well, and to me, it kind of comes down to what the designer was trying to model or simulate. I mean, in the Vietnam game, the old Vietnam game, it was more of the military operations and the campaigns and how that was being portrayed on the terrain. And again, back to your more traditional hex and counter.
Now, which game are we talking about? The VG game?
The Victor Point game, the Victory Games.
Okay.
Yeah, but coin is focusing on counterinsurgency. So it's focusing on, you know, it takes certain factors or certain vectors that it wants to model, you know, looking at the, you know, the politics and the influence and military, but it's automatically abstracting and taking out and looking at these, you know, 4 or 5 factors that it wants to focus on, and then you're limited on what decisions you have, you know, what options or what actions you can take, and then what special actions you can take that focus on those factors. So at its essence, it's already abstracting it, but in a good way. I mean, you know, because it's wanting to focus on these factors and not focusing on, you know, your traditional military campaign. It's approaching it in different ways, and it is interesting what Art was saying, how it kind of mirrors each other in some of those respects, or how it overlaps, I guess, in some aspects. But it's taking a totally different approach. So to me, they're really not comparable in that regard.
Now, this statement he has here, I understand it, like dumbing down the blocks because every military unit is not created equal, and I mean it abstracts from the historical child. Is he missing the point, or is he right?
He's missing the detail that the different blocks do in fact have different in a coin, and we're talking about coin. I'm talking about coin.
We're talking about coin, yeah.
So let's say you have, again, I'll take Udistan Plain because I'm familiar with the factions. The Taliban blocks represent Taliban cells, right? They're blocks, but the coalition blocks represent actual military troops and their capabilities, because the two factions have different action menus, are very different, and the differences in capabilities are addressed by that mechanism. To say that they're just because they're blocks and you don't have factors on the blocks doesn't, I mean, that doesn't, there's no specific, yes, that's vacuous, what we used to call in discrete math, vacuously true. It's correct, but it's missing an important detail of the way the blocks function is different. So
there's no need for historicity there.
Well, you're getting the history. I mean, the designer is is designing to highlight the history that they want to highlight, right? To highlight the historical mechanisms that they want to highlight in the design. So the coin game, for example, so again, you know, compare it to the Victory Games Vietnam. The Victory Games Vietnam, there's two sides. There's the North Vietnamese side and the South Vietnamese sides with the US and all that. The coin game has two different players playing the US and interventionist forces versus the ARVN and South Vietnam forces. And they don't have exactly the same or even compatible sometimes victory conditions. So they are going to be at loggerheads on some decisions. And yeah, they're going to coordinate stuff, but they're also going to have their own goals, right? That is a thing that Fire in the Lake chose to depict, rather than the Vietnam, you know, that Nick Karp didn't depict that in the Victory Games Vietnam, which is not a slight against Victory Games Vietnam. It's just that wasn't part of Nick's goal to simulate that.
Mm-hmm.
Now the Victory game, I'm thinking, I thought it was designed by Mark Herman, that the Vietnam 65 to 75. I thought that was
that's Nick Karp game.
Okay, that's the new one that's coming out, Deluxe GMT P500. Is that right?
That's the same game, yeah.
Now, is that a must buy?
It was for me. I'm not going to say it is for everybody. It is so there's a bunch of scenarios, and the scenarios are playable, but the campaign game is a huge monster in terms of time that it takes. I'd estimate that it probably takes well over 100 hours to play that campaign up. But you're also playing out this 10-year campaign, right? So, I mean, you're getting, it does what it says on the tin.
I mean, man, the bang for your buck in terms of time of entertainment, man, you can't get better than a big war game. I swear.
So if we're talking about bang for the buck, the price on that thing, the pre-order price on that new release from GMT is ludicrously low.
It's like what, $65 or something?
Yeah, something like 69 or something like that. It's like 3 maps and 4 or 5 or 6 counter sheets or something like that. It's going to have so much play value in it. The price of that is absolutely silly low. Let's assume you play it, right? If you just buy it and put it on your shelf, then maybe it's not worth it to you. But if you're going to play it, and I'll play it. I got the original, right?
Is that a strict reprint, or did they modify it, update it, or put any content that's happened over the years?
So based on the dev diaries that Mitch Land, who is doing the development on it, is doing, it is going to be very lightly updated to correct some minor map issues and OB issues, and that's it.
Oh well, NY Raider, I can answer for Robert.
Let me apologize.
I can answer for Robert. He doesn't want to talk. He talks too much at work, so he decided to pull the guy from Dallas there. What's his name? The guy, he doesn't talk on Sundays. So Rob, that's why Rob doesn't talk. Don't worry about it. It's not us, man. It's him.
Rob came in I will point out that Rob came in at the exact last minute too. So, because Dan and I'm like, well, yeah, go ahead, invite him. And then I'm like, wait, I got his address too. I'll send him the thing too.
Yeah, no, it's because Rob's a wealth of information. Artie, you're a wealth of information. It's just awesome. You guys answer my questions, even though I forget them a minute later. It doesn't matter. I'll ask them again. It freaks me out. I'm sure some of my stupid questions, people like, I was always the clown in the class. Could you imagine me, a clown in the class? And anyways, and I was always the guy in front of the class and ask, oh, how come this? And a couple of guys were grateful, and they said, Dan, you're speaking for us. I got a few tomatoes in the head, but that's okay. Whatever.
Well, Dan, you're my favorite client, because I get to charge you for answering the question the first time, and the second time, and the third time.
Oh man,
that's even better.
This is great. This is great. I'd love to know more about coin there, guys. I really, really, really would. I've got a psychological block, which is not natural. I'm sure I'd enjoy it. I'm sure.
Well, maybe we'll talk about that next week then.
Well, that's up to you. It's your house, man. It's your you're making the soup.
I've got a basic flow through video on not Fire in Lake, but a distant plane that is one of my most popular videos. And it's just like talking about the basic pacing mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
But we can totally. I haven't touched a coin game in at least a year.
I mean, I want to know, man.
That's about right.
Know. And so, I mean, the show is going to be over in a couple of seconds. Rob, thank you so much
Thanks for coming.
For listening to us.
Well, thank you. I got a couple of words in. I feel good.
And happy
all the
birthday.
Smart talk. Mark, Robert had all the smart talk.
Happy birthday, Artie, and thank you very much, chat. And I'm going to verbally say who's banned from being on the channel. Bayonet Brent.
That punk.
There's another. Who is he, a punk?
He's a punk.
Okay,
he's younger than me, which makes him a punk.
Bayonet Brent, you're not allowed. Thank you very much. We have a lawyer on the show. We have a lawyer on the show. You'll be getting your whatever the hell it's called, a summons or whatever.
A bill, at least.
So, guys, thanks again. Thanks again, Rob. And Rob, you got a great show on happening. Kilroy was here. I love it, even though I forget. As soon as I watch it, I forget, and I say, "What are you talking about?" But anyways. Okay, so
I want to thank ARDWULF again for calling it out. That's very, very kind of you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm trying to. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while, and you were just first on the list because you had a good video that day, I believe, was why. So,
and guys, you see these mushrooms? This is called an Amanita agaric. You see how cute it is? It's all really nice, Alice in Wonderland. Well. It's got a little skirt. How cute. The skirt tells you, I'm going to kill you. And this here tells you, only take a few little spots if you want to trip well.
Magical Canadian mushroom.
Do not touch that mushroom. You're going to die. Okay? So here goes. And where's my outro? What the hell's the matter with me?
I don't know how you've arranged your StreamYard. I don't know.
Okay.
I think I'm going to call those sesame seed bun mushrooms, actually, because that's what they look like to me.
All right. So, well, I guess we're just going to say bye and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.